It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Sophie Bain, sitting in for Barnett Bain. Powerful. Yeah.
I love him. I think that he brings in that spiritual aspect to the adoption community that sometimes I think is lacking, which is so helpful.
It is helpful. Well, it's a perspective that it changes the game. I mean, you and I both, I have my degree already, but you're working on your degree and you're going to finish this year on spiritual psychology. And for me, in looking out at the world and saying, where do I want to do with, prior to going to USM, I had done a lot of men's work. I had done a lot of work on myself. But the psychology by itself, I'd been in therapy, wasn't sufficient. And, this element of the healing process, which is a kind of, for the USM language is applying, healing is the process of applying love to whatever part inside hurts. And love, of course, expressed as compassion or forgiveness or whatever. And all those, of course, are practices within the context of the program, practicing forgiveness and practicing self-acceptance and practicing compassion and so forth. Prior to going to USM, I kind of held these things almost separately. So, the opportunity to put them together was really powerful. And obviously with Noah, he isn't necessarily from USM. I think he got his degree from Loyola Marymount. But regardless, he's clearly put this together and realized that, okay, it's one thing to analyze and understand, but it's another thing to move into that intense compassion that allows us to evolve to where we, as we were sort of saying, we can hold it in a generous way. We can hold the part of us, that we previously wanted to fix, because a lot of people go to therapy wanting to get fixed, right? And go, wow, there's nothing to fix. There's something to integrate, perhaps, and there's a part of me that needs to be accepted and loved, and maybe an expression of that you and I both can speak to becomes a gift.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's a very, very profound way that you just said it, because I think me going to therapy up until, probably my 20s, was to fix that part of me, to fix it, to try to find some way to make it better. And so I would go out, a lot of the time in high school, I would try to find things outside of myself to try to fix it. And then, college and then coming into USM, I've realized it's a way of integrating. It's a way of bringing it all together rather than keeping it so separate.
Right.
And then that way also, like he was talking about the relationship aspect with other people in our lives, especially for me. I know being intimate and being that close to someone, there is that push-pull that I sometimes experience.
Right.
But as going through first year and now going into second year of USM, I don't experience that as much because I think I'm not push-pulling from myself.
Well, you have a process, right?
Yes.
There's a process of really understanding these elements within you that liberates you from, believing, as it were, that part of you is the only part of you.
Right.
I've talked about this in the context of just my wife and I, that when we get into, always language, like you always just do this or you never do that, and that as a storyline, as a thread, is highly destructive. But the moment I can say, part of me feels like you never or you always, now I've got a little dimension to it, and that's very liberating. So there's a way of going, okay, part of me feels like you never do this. Another part of me recognizes that you do a lot of things, and yada, yada, yada. So there's a way of kind of holding, and we've talked about this on the show often, that I can hold something as true and not true at the same time. Paradox is the position of power. That's where we own the complexity of the world around us. One of the things that you were talking about, and I want to go back to this because you use the language I use in terms of integrate, but I like the idea that we often see things as separate. And when we understand that they're not, that everything is related in a systemic way, like everything is linked in some way, we move out of the mindset of change, right? This is where I want to change something, into the offer of transformation.
Right.
Because transformation doesn't leave anything behind.
No.
Like when we transform, it's like, I didn't just lose weight. I have a 100-pound swing in my adult life. I didn't lose anything. I released the weight as a way of integrating the aspects of me that were fragmented, that were being expressed through my patterns around food. It's a very different thing than changing anything, right?
It's extremely different. Integrating, and I feel like it has a wholeness to it. It has a gentleness to it. It has a an aspect of just compassion, whereas changing, I feel like makes it very narrow.
It does. And what you were talking about before, the idea that there's something that needs to be fixed is part of the problem. Calling it a problem is a problem.
Yeah.
The minute you think you have a problem, congratulations, you do.
Right.
Where there's a part of me that I recognize that, as Noah was saying, we don't want driving the bus, but compassionately understanding, caring for that part, like you can sit in the back here, it's okay to be you, but I'm going to be the driver, the adult self, versus, again, these sort of, we're talking in terms of more inner child and where inner child is sort of screaming and we haven't been caring for, as you were saying, with the practices you use to sort of keep that part of you, regulated, self-regulating and modulated so that it doesn't, leak out or leap out.
Yes. I think that's exactly it. Is the part of me is a huge piece of it, because the second that you identify with the whole of you,
right,
there's no more space for anything.
No space. You're sunk. It's very narrow.
It's just
this bus is going to crash.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the second that you can identify, okay, there's part of me that has these fears, or I'm experiencing, a part of me is experiencing being fearful or that you're going to leave. And a part of me is aware that you're also here to stay. But the second that you hold those, as we're talking paradox, that's where the freedom comes in.
Right. Well, one of the things you and I talked about offline, I'd like to bring it up now, is that you were saying about your story, you said, I used to hold on to my story really tightly, and I've let go of it. I've got enough of a sense of myself, and I've got these tools that I don't have to grip my story so tightly. It's become looser, which is similar to what you're talking about. It's created space for, it might work out, it might not, but I'm okay in this, and I can be present and so forth, and not be so sort of reactionary and coming from that place of the wounded self, right?
Yeah, it allows for just breath, for a space to be able to just be. Yeah. And to be okay with either aspect, and to just allow it to just happen, rather than trying to force it to happen one way or wanting it. It's just an understanding of what is. Yeah,
this deep and profound sense of self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And then the ability to respond, the responsibility element that Noah was talking about, where I really move into being able to respond to what comes up, which means I don't have to require people to be what I need them to be to keep myself safe. I can allow them to be whoever they are. And of course, that comes from having a sense in my own skin that I can be, in one person, many people. Yes. And I don't have to identify with it. And I know you and my dad talk about this all the time, is allowing people to be themselves. Yeah. And, it's a process to allow someone else, because if we're all mirrors for each other, allowing someone else to be and being okay with the stuff that they reflect back to you. Well, this is the issue, because when we're not okay, then the work is to go, oh, it's about me. Right. One of the little lines that Barnett and I repeat all the time is when we find ourselves in a judgment, that person's an idiot, we add a phrase, and so am I. Right. It's a kind of practice where when we find ourselves in judgment, complete the phrase. Let's loop it back. Let's get it to U-turn back to us. That's the level of responsibility. Yes. It's liberating. At first, it seems like it's not liberating. It feels like, oh God, now I'm on the hook. But again, that's the fundamental sense there's something wrong with us. And I love coming from the adoption side of this, where there's a deep compassion for how. What was the word he used? Hang on a sec. I'm going to try to find it. I wrote it down. Primal wound. That's what Noah said. There's this primal sense that how do I really reconcile with, it's a loud voice that says there's something wrong with me because I was a mistake or whatever. I was given up or however it looks, however it's interpreted. Yeah, no, there definitely is that aspect of it. And that is spoken about a lot in the adoption community, is that primal wound. And it's that sense of however your story was that you came in. And I think this was for me, as when I was younger, that was the piece that I held on to so tightly. Right. Was the idea that, Charity was 14, my dad was 16, my dad didn't know.
And so there was that aspect of like, who am I? Like, I was this mistake. I was this, like, and then she gave me up. And so I had this running tally of stories that I held on to very, very, very tightly.
Yep.
And now I've allowed that to, after meeting her, I've allowed it to be a little looser and a little bit more expansive.
I love that. Again, loosening the story to allow for things to have complexity. One of the things you brought up, when you were 14, I hope it's okay to bring this up.
Yes.
When you were 14, you had you knew that your birth mom was 14 when she got pregnant. So when you hit 14, you had a kind of moment, and I don't want to categorize it for you, but just recognizing that is an important moment in your own history as you inherit it from your mom, hitting that age. Can you talk about that? Because I found that profound when you and I were speaking offline about just coming to the age where your mom made a fundamental decision that in essence created you, and that now you were at that place, and what that was about for you.
I think it was confusing at some times, and I think that, it brought up a lot of feelings for me.
Yeah.
Being that she was also 14 and I was 14, and already I was trying to figure out where I fit in this world. And
what would it be like to have a baby at this moment in time? Yeah.
And to think about that also, and to have that in the back of my mind, because you're coming into sexuality and you're coming into that place where, your hormones are raging, and that's a lot of where things start to happen at that time, and high school, and then you have boys, and there's an excitement to it, but there's also a quality of like, wow, like the trying to understand the idea of
it. And your sense of the impact of, let's say having sex or not having sex or whatever, just your relationship to that. I mean, I was 14. I wasn't paying attention to that. I mean, I was, whatever. But the point being that there's another level of awareness because you were the product of a decision made at 14 that's going to, in my mind, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, give you a heightened sense of awareness of the impact of those decisions, right?
Yes, there was a heightened sense of awareness, as well as kind of a, like, want to explore.
Okay.
And along with kind of like a confusion about what it meant.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was very complex. And I think at 14, when I was still figuring out things and I wasn't as aware as I am now, that I played out a lot of stories that I was trying to...
So let me ask you a question. I'm sorry I cut you off.
No.
We're going to run out of time. Now, before we run out of time, I want to get to this. So so let's say a 14-year-old girl comes to you, and let's say it's a mirror, that her mom got pregnant at 14, she's some 14, and she's maybe even acting out in a destructive patterning that could create the same circumstances. I would imagine, I mean, I know that in my family of origin, there's some patterning that's sort of handed down, and you find, I mean, I guess it's okay to say this about Jasmine, my wife, is that her mom got pregnant at 17, she got pregnant at 17, you go, well, wait a minute, what was that about? And so I wonder if you run into that in counseling young people where they're kind of on paths that may mirror some of the destructive patterning that the parents were doing.
I think that's the interesting thing about adoption, is that there is that mirror, but there also is that awareness, because you have you have your parents that also come in with their energy.
Your parents did. I'm saying there are people who don't have the benefit of that. In other words,
there are people.
I mean, one of the things, and forgive me, I'm not putting this on you, but the idea that you're really serving as a huge container for people so that they don't crash the bus, to use that language again, knowing the complexity of being a young person, going through all of this. I would imagine, you don't have to know this today, by the way. I mean, I'm not really working to put you on the spot. It's just idea that how do you work with somebody who doesn't have the support? Now you become the support to guide them through this quagmire. I mean, we can say, I don't know, but the idea is, isn't that part of the work that you feel compelled to do?
Yes, it is. It definitely is. And I think it's going to be a discovery along the way.
Yeah.
Of figuring out what that is, because we do have to allow them to have the process of their journey.
Yes.
But at the same time, sharing and being of counseling and wanting to share my story, I hope that they'll gain something.
It's so smart.
From it.
What okay, so look, one of the things you've said, and I'm really kind of coming to the end here, but I wanted to say this. I when people have a impactful experience similar to what you're talking about, and they're drawn to work in that environment, oftentimes I'm a little wary that they haven't done enough of their own healing, and they're almost vicariously trying to do it through the process, which is okay if it's out. Like, I realize I'm healing as I'm doing this, but often it isn't. And so it gets messy. What I love about what you're saying, again, by sort of backing off that and saying, this is playing out in front of me, I think that's really valuable. I think the propensity to want to have it figured out, which so many people make the mistake of, and they rush in to go help and they haven't figured it out. Where if it's open, it's like, wow, this is such a process, and I'm in the process. That's a gift to the people who you get to be around. That, look, I'm not pretending like I've worked this out. I'm in it. But the good news is I may be a couple steps ahead, or I have a way of reflecting something to you that might be helpful.
Exactly, and I think that's this, is that I'll be the first person to say that, creating the curriculum I want to create and doing the adopt salons with the teens, it is a way for me to, and I'll be the first to say it in the group, I'm healing with you. Yes. I'm learning with you.
Well, I feel that with my clients in the coaching process. Listen, we got to wrap it up. I am so grateful you took the time to be with us today. It's a thrill. I'm sure for the audience, too, that they've heard about Sophie, who's Sophie, and now she's here.
I'm here.
Thank you so much.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
And I'm glad we got to cover this topic. Those of you listening, look, it's a tough one. And maybe when Barnett gets back, we'll talk a little more about this. I'm sure he'll have a lot to say here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. So stay tuned and keep coming back. Thanks for listening.